Welcome to part 2 of Cybersecurity for Nonprofits with Charles Gibson. Charles is owner and president of CodeStar Incorporated. He has been providing information technology solutions to small businesses for 23 years. He has also been a control systems engineer, a software developer, adjunct faculty with the University System of New Hampshire, and a trainer for the New Hampshire Manufacturing Extension. He holds a master's degree in information assurance from Norwich University, a national leader in cybersecurity training.
It's National Cybersecurity Month, and we put together a three-part series entitled Cybersecurity for Nonprofits. This episode is Think You're All Set? Think Again. I would like to thank Brattleboro Community Television and all the stakeholders at CodeStar for making this series possible. Let's start. In this series, we want to demystify cybersecurity. We want to do that by defining terms in plain English, by answering common questions, and showing you how to prioritize and how to make improvements even on a limited budget. Because your mission depends upon your digital information, such as donor data, client data, financial records, and correspondence. In this part 2, we will talk about the next set of important cybersecurity activities. A common theme that we hear at CodeStar is, oh, I'm all set with IT. And you may very well be, but in this age of increased risks, increased activity of bad actors on the internet, I would respectfully ask you to think again. What we're going to talk about this time is our 10 for 10 cybersecurity guide. An important underpinning of any cybersecurity activities is access control. And of course, the most important thing you can do, in my opinion, is backup. Our 10 for 10 cybersecurity guide is a continuation of this series in a way, because it gives you 10 activities requiring perhaps 10 minutes each that you can do one a day on your coffee break, at lunchtime. And when you're done, if you do that, then at the end of your guide and at the end of this series, you'll be in a much better position with regard to your cybersecurity program. An example, if you're handling any kind of private information, whether it be names and addresses or social security numbers or financial information, then you are very likely to be liable under your state's data and privacy breach law. And in our guide, we give you a link where you can go and find out about your state. And if if your organization reaches across the state line and you're providing services in multiple states, then you need to be familiar with each state's breach law because they can be significantly different. You can find the guide and the slides from the previous episode at www.codestar.us/nonprofits. One of the major and important underpinnings of any cybersecurity activity, and in fact, any of the standards that you might hear about, HIPAA, PCI, DSS, ISO 27000, they all rely upon access control. And it's basically the who, what, and how of the private information that you're protecting. Who needs access to that data? How are you protecting it from unwanted access? For those who have been trained or who have been in privacy law, or if you're covered by regulation, those who have been trained to that regulation need to access that data, and it would be best for you to think about how they go about doing that. I mentioned how you intend to prevent unauthorized access, and that can be as simple as pushing the lock on a filing cabinet or using good passwords to protect access to the computer systems where that information is stored. Once you begin to use access control and recognize that you may be at risk for loss or corruption of your data, and that you're liable under state privacy law, you need to recognize and report any breach or any loss of data that might occur, and you should have a plan for recovering from that loss. All of this really should be documented. It can be documented in the most simple way. It doesn't have to be in standards language. It can be in simple, plain English. But the documentation helps in two ways. First, it's a training aid. So the first thing that your stakeholders or your staff can do is just review your documentation simply by reading it. And then later on, you may implement disaster recovery drills or business continuity drills of some kind. Documentation also aids in compliance. If you are liable under, say, state breach law, or for instance, you're a covered entity under HIPAA, then the first thing that is going to happen if you have a breach or if you get a desk audit is they're going to want to see your access control methodologies, your policies, and your procedures. I emphasized the use of backups in the last episode. I have to say that I think that if there's no other thing that you do with regard to cybersecurity, that implementing a backup regimen is the one thing that you really should do. The truth about disaster recovery is the backup makes all the difference. I have been in offices where I had to deliver the bad news. Your data is gone and it's not coming back. In many offices, I was also able to say, guess what? This box is no longer working, but I can put your database and your documents on a different box and have you up and running by the end of the day. In those two cases, the difference was the working backup. If you don't have a backup, it can mean that you immediately stop your operations without any idea really when you can start again. It can mean the loss of reputation and goodwill. Folks are trusting you to keep their data private, to keep it off of the internet, to keep it out of the wrong hands. Just imagine how we all feel now about Equifax after the massive data breach that they had to report. It can also mean if you lose your passwords, if you lose your login information, if you lose other credentials, it can mean that you no longer have access to your critical accounts, bank accounts, email accounts, and the websites that you use in the course of executing your mission. You would be forced, and this is probably worst of all, you would be forced to recreate your databases and your documents, your correspondence, if possible. In a medical office, that might mean going back to paper records, going back to your charts and entering all that information all over again. In any other organization, it certainly means that you're going to be scrambling to try to find paper copies if they even exist. Now I'm going to talk about backup as an activity. And of course, the first thing is to do backups, you have to have a media of some kind. I've seen all kinds of media used in backups. I've seen thumb drives, or what you might call a flash drive or a data stick. I've seen CDs and DVDs being used. Some offices use tape cartridges or some form of magnetic cartridge. It's like a little hard drive. I've also seen external hard drives used, perhaps just a USB drive or network attached, which means you plug a network cable into them and set them on a shelf somewhere. They can all be used effectively in a backup scheme, but it's important to recognize that they're all fragile in some way. Thumb drives, perhaps the most fragile of all devices. You can lose them, step on them, drop them down a drain grate, drop them in your coffee. They're susceptible to electrostatic shock and mechanical shock. So if you're going to use a flash drive, you really should have more than one and rotate them. With CDs and DVDs, they're easily scratched. They delaminate after a while. They don't last 100 years like you hear. They only, in some cases, only last 5 or 6 years at the most. If you're using rewritables, they can stop working suddenly and your data just isn't there anymore. External hard drives have the same vulnerabilities and the same fragility as the PC box that's sitting under your desk. If you drop them, if you pour hot coffee into the vent or what have you, then they're very likely to stop working, and it's difficult to get that data back. The best thing to do to protect you against all such fragile and vulnerable devices is to use more than one of them and rotate them. If you want to back up every day, why not have 5 thumb drives? They're not that expensive. And you can mark them with a little label, Monday through Friday. Put one in, put Mondays in, back up, and you can even take it out of the building. Carry it home with you, put it in a safety deposit box, and rotate them that way. And CDs and DVDs, tape cartridges, magnetic cartridges, even external hard drives. The USB versions are not that expensive, and you could rotate 2 or 3 of them if you wanted to. And in case one stops working or gets lost, then you still have most of your data available to you immediately. Another possible method for redundancy is the offsite backup. For instance, Amazon, Iron Mountain, Carbonite, they all offer inexpensive offsite backup methods. There are also dedicated offsite backup services that are tailored to specific purposes. For instance, if you need to comply with HIPAA, then there are dedicated offsite backup services that are HIPAA compliant. A concern with any of those cloud services or even dedicated backup services is security. Who is looking at your data? Who has access to it? Who can change it? And the HIPAA compliant backup services might be willing to offer you a business associate agreement, in which case you can trust them to be as HIPAA compliant as they can be. But in any other service, I would ask the question, who's looking at my data and where is it? The second concern with offsite backup and with cloud services is having quick access to your data if you need it. It takes a little while to run the backup, but if you have gigabytes of data and you're trying to download it over a common internet connection, it could take hours or days to pull your data back, to pull all of your data back. So if you're down to the point where you're doing a bare metal recovery, in other words, building a new box or building a new server, and you've got to have quick access to your data, you might want to consider a local backup as well as your offsite backup. In fact, the backup method that we recommend is to have a local backup with media that you rotate, and that you rotate it frequently, every day if you can, and that you have an additional offsite backup that protects you against geological disasters. It can protect you against fires and floods, lightning strikes. It can prevent you, it can protect you from those little fragile devices going bad all at once, and it can really provide you with a level of security that no other type of backup can. Once you have your backup in place, I would recommend that you verify the data regularly. Verify it as often as you can, once a week or once a month. You can have a little test file that's sleeping on your backup somewhere, and every now and then just try to pull that file back. It can just be a text file that says, "Hello world." It could be a photograph, or perhaps you want to do a couple different types just to make sure that things are being stored properly and that you can recover them if you need to. All right. If you have questions, we're live on Facebook. You can submit them to info@coaststar.us or submit them live on Facebook. I'd like to ask you to mark your calendars for part 3 next week, same time, same place. We're calling it Next Steps. We want to wrap up what we've been talking about. We want to talk about a couple of important cybersecurity practices, and then we'll be done. And you can continue on with your 10 for 10 guide. The slides, our survey for nonprofits, and the 10 for 10 guide You can find them at www.codestar.us/nonprofits. And while you're there, you can sign up for our Security Tips newsletter. I have a question here. How do I get help with data recovery in an emergency? If you are at the point where you really need data recovery right away, then I would recommend that you seek professional help. Your IT service provider, if you have one, might very well know how to do that. Sometimes data recovery is simple. You just need to know how to deal with the device that you're using to back up. Also, it's possible to pull data off of a failed hard drive or out of a failed workstation or a failed server, but those tend to be more specialized services, and you might find yourself calling a data recovery service. We at CodeStar have experience with recovering data from a wide range of devices under a wide range of conditions, and you can certainly call us as well. Question number 2. What about automated backups? An automated backup is a good idea. In other words, you have a piece of software that is set to back up the data at a certain time every day, or maybe a couple of times a day. And I would recommend using automated backup software. There are some really good examples out there. There are some that you can buy, and some that that are free and open source. So you can take a look at that. With automated backups, you still want to go through your verification process. It saves you from having to do a manual backup every day, but you always want to be sure that your data is being backed up, even if you have software doing it for you. They generate log files. They can email you when they're done, but even so, it's best to go and actually look at your backup media, look at your offsite backup, and check to be sure that the data is actually being backed up on a regular basis. All right, that's all we have. Thanks for watching.